Lori. Good afternoon. It is my honor to welcome Dr. Catherine R. Baratta, an associate professor of social work at Central Connecticut State in Connecticut. Kathy, or I'm sorry, she's always been Baratta to me, is a native of Solvay. She received her bachelor's degree from Franklin Pierce College, now Franklin Pierce University. She received her master's in social work and a master's in public and international affairs from the University of Pittsburgh. And here I have to say I was always a little envious because while there, she and her friends would sometimes greet Mr. Rogers as he walked to work. I first connected with Baratta when working at the Volunteer Center in 1987. We shared a pod. I worked with a retired senior volunteer program, another colleague worked with a teen volunteer program, and Kathy directed a national demonstration project called the Foster Care Youth Independence Program. It was a unique program and was one of President George Bush's 23rd Points of Light for his Points of Life initiative. In addition to the work we did, we also declared ourselves the Pod Morale Committee, and we did much to keep positive energy and laughter in the center. Baratta began working on her PhD at Syracuse University while I was working on my master's in social work, so we kept connected and alive with humor. While looking at the issues of how homelessness was handled in Syracuse back in the 19th century, she discovered Arria Huntington, the daughter of the first bishop of the Diocese of Central New York. She kept finding Arria's name in many places of work in the community and eventually found herself at the Porter Phelps Huntington Family Archive at Amherst College in Massachusetts. Our bicentennial is a wonderful time to share what this great woman had done for our community, and we are honored to have Catherine Baratta to talk with us. This is the first she has talked locally about Arria, and already others are asking to have her speak. So with that, please welcome Dr. Catherine Baratta to tell us more about Arria.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. Today I hope to provide a snapshot of Arria Sargent Huntington for you. And it's based on decades, a lot of it is decades of letter writing, especially to her brother George, that are in the archives at Amherst College. I've also used newspapers. 19th century newspapers are wonderful. Incorporation papers, contracts. I'm just on the lookout for everything. People's recollections of her, too, I've been looking at. So I hope it's not that long and that you'll have questions and want to have a discussion. Thank you. During the autumn of 1869, Miss Arria Sargent Huntington, at 21 years of age, arrived in Syracuse with her family. It marked a profound period for her. Up to that point, the farthest west she had traveled was Hadley, Massachusetts, where the ancestral home of her father, the bishop, was. She and her brothers and sisters imagined their new home as the Wild West. Contrary to the vibrant and civilized urban life they were accustomed to Boston. The imagery was no doubt fueled by the bishop's mandate to evangelize the people of the Onondaga Nation who resided in the newly established diocese. Despite the excitement of establishing a new ministry, it was a sad occasion for Arria, who left behind her brother George, aged 25 years, her intellectual soulmate. Although he had been away for years, first at Harvard, then at seminary in Connecticut, it was followed by a teaching position in Wisconsin. The bishop's first official duty was to ordain George, and he assumed parish responsibilities in Malden, Mass. Arria visited him and his family often, but weekly letter writing remained their main source of communication until his death in 1904, just hours after his father, the bishop, died. More significantly, it was a difficult transition for the 21-year-old to leave Boston, the center for her intellectual social life. Since entering society at 16 years of age, Arria had a full social calendar. She was a frequent guest at parties, receptions, musical and dramatic performances, and had an extensive circle of female friends, many of whom she attended the School for Young Ladies at the Agassiz School in Cambridge with. Not only did she enjoy the gaiety, particularly the dancing, that these social events provided, Miss Huntington participated in society life for the same reason that her peers did, with an eye to a potential suitor. Motivated by the impending move, where she would have to begin, in essence, a new life with new friends and acquaintances, and to her gaining in years, Arria began contemplating a single life. Along with this, she thought about the position the coming woman is to hold, for which she would spend the rest of her life formulating. 3 months prior to the family's move, in one of the lengthiest letters she ever wrote to George, Arria concluded that regardless of marital status, all women should be educated to be independent of marriage. This was a fundamental goal that she would strive for in all of her reform efforts. Arria wrote to George, "I am not prepared to go so far to say that the time ought to be when women should choose a profession or vocation of staying at home and, which you apparently considered as synonymous as doing nothing. It is a doubt with me whether it should be good for young women to go out into the world as young men do, to pursue their own livelihood. It may be that we shall see it tried generally in our lifetime." And I would be willing to wait the result of this experiment before pronouncing decidedly against it. With regard to a woman, I think it would be really wrong for her to take the ordering of her own destiny into her hands, so far as to say she will not marry. It may be that Providence designs her to fulfill her noble conditions of being a wife and mother, but I would educate all women to be independent of marriage. Arria further wrote to her brother that although she was disinclined to marry, likely she would remain single because she never yet seen any man I would have had for a husband, although she would consider it a leading of Providence if she did. Arria was, however, certainly looking forward to engaging in some definite church work, either parish visiting or education. She also discussed another option, entering formal sisterhoods. Arria did not rule out the possibility of becoming a deaconess. Whether conscious or not, Arria entered Syracuse having already made the decision to remain a single woman. Although she would not fulfill, in her words, the normal condition of being a wife and mother, she participated in public life, where she shaped the family life throughout Syracuse and beyond. This Arria Sargent Huntington was more influential, ensuring the welfare of women and children as a single unmarried woman than she would have been if she had married and had children of her own. Immediately upon arrival, she began what she called Sunday work, attending to the spiritual and religious needs. A devout Episcopalian, the church was the center of her life for the next 15 years. She participated in traditional female roles, visiting parishioners, establishing and directing Sunday schools, and running mothers' groups, partnering with her own mother. She also wrote operettas that the children performed for different occasions. My favorite is A Thanksgiving Harvest, where children were dressed up as vegetables. Potatoes had Irish brogues and sang songs. The beats were German, and as they sang, they dropped into a pot. Arria was also the bishop's assistant. Went back to the Thanksgiving Harvest. It was there she discovered 5-year-old Edna May. Edna May would go on to Hollywood to become a film star. Yeah. Arria was the bishop's assistant, albeit unofficial, developing the Central New York Episcopal Diocese. As her mother would report, she frequently sat next to the bishop as he wrote, then reading and commenting on his writing. I'd also like to say that Mrs. Huntington, Hannah, was privy to all matters of the church and his greatest supporter and confidant. Arria, however, as the daughter of a prominent churchman, life provided her opportunities not readily available to other women. Committed to the development of Calvary and St. John's missions, she had an active role stewarding both into churchhood, developing a mission school with her brother James, who was 15 upon the arrival to Syracuse. And you may know that James, her brother, started the Episcopal monastic order of the Holy Cross. He entered monk life. We could talk about him later. Who Arria and George, and then the youngest, who Arria and George would refer to as the babies in their letters, were Ruth, who was 9 years old, and Mary, 7 years. In time, they contributed to what could best be described as the family business. Despite her love and commitment to church work, it had its downside and was very frustrating. It was Arria who was called upon in times of crisis, specifically administrative and financial, to eradicate problems. The bishop depended enormously on her, not only from her abilities, but he trusted her. The bishop called on her to fix things, but didn't always abide by her recommendations. But then again, the bishop didn't always abide by anyone else's recommendations either. A frequent point of contention was the male workers. For over a year, Arria had to contend with the problems created by Mr. Bradley at St. John's Mission in 1872. She wrote to George, "Our mission has got the lowest point under Mr. Bradley. The present state of affairs is that Mr. Bradley is determined not to resign. He is really too indifferent that he does not know what classes and teachers belong together. I am aching to get someone efficient in charge. Mr. Fuller has plenty of theories, and Papa seems determined to do something for us, but the weight still falls where it always has done, on my shoulders. Mr. Fuller cheerfully says that St. John's has gone to the dogs without assuming the responsibility in the least." Eventually, Mr. Bradley left, but more difficulties were to occur with a new worker, Mr. Bowman. The following year turned out to be worse. Mr. Bowman was a financial nightmare for the young mission. Arria was furious when she had declined an invitation to attend a consecration in Malden, Mass, to deal with the crisis, stating to George, "Papa did not consider it best, and that settled the matter." She continued to write, "I cannot be spared at this time. The affairs at our chapel are in such a state. Mr. Bowman can make himself useful." I'm hoping there are no relatives of Mr. Bowman or Bradley in here. "Can make himself useful if he is looked after, but his laxity in business matters cost us $100 in payments for a lot of land, simply because he neglected to sign the agreement and pay the money at a certain time. Now we ladies find the only safe way is to keep all the expenditures in our own hands and overlook every item. Twice we had to collect the $1,000 necessary to fix up the chapel. We prefer to see that it is spent as widely as possible." While she had to deal with these problems, there was no relief from her other duties. "To make matters worse," she wrote George, "a great deal of visiting needs to be done, and nobody does it but me." This did not go unnoticed by her mother, who early on knew about her responsibilities. In an 1871 letter to George, she wrote, "This afternoon we were to bend to St. George, which is suddenly in need of a vigorous head. If Arria was a man, things would be in nice order. There she cannot do it all, although there are male workers. There is no one fitted to be the head. The bishop were not the only entity that the bishop counted on Arria to attend to. There were times the bishop requested her to address issues at the house of the Good Shepherd, sometimes weeks at a time too. Continuing, her mother wished Arria would take a break from all her work for fear it is turning her into a middle-aged woman too soon. Although her mother thought that she should be content that Arria was doing the work she was appointed to do, her maternal instinct took over, and she did not like the toll it took on her. In 1882, Arria retired from Sunday work and committed herself to full-time community work. As her familiarity with the community increased, Arria became active in the social, economic, and political life of Syracuse. Together with her father and brother James, they established the Shelter for Homeless Women and Girls, 1877 to 1918. This was the setting for Arria's life work. The shelter, as it was commonly referred to, provided protection, moral instruction, and training and employment to homeless women, female prisoners, and vagrant and neglected girls. Arria believed in the inherent goodness of people. Wayward women and girls could be redeemed, as demonstrated by the stated mission that she no doubt wrote. To have erred and have so much as one earnest desire to return to the right way, they would be welcomed and cared for. They will receive sympathy, kindness, protection, and counsel. They will take place as a Christian family, which will be made as comfortable and cheerful as circumstances allowed. They will be instructed in all kinds of work as they are capable of doing and will be expected to be industrious and obedient. Arria focused much of her efforts on who were considered the undesirable poor, those who were deemed not worthy to receive assistance. Residents of the shelter were not her only concern. She attended criminal trials to learn about the criminal justice system. One such trial was the Holmes trial. Mrs. Holmes was charged with poisoning and killing her husband, for which she was eventually found innocent. Arria was there to provide support to Mrs. Holmes the entire time. There are also times when the family, the Huntington family, took in children when the mothers who were murdered, typically by their spouses. Arria and her brother James was adamant of providing an alternative for prisons for erring women and children. So successful were their efforts that in 1888, state legislation was enacted, which empowered the Syracuse chief of police to bring wayward girls directly to the shelter upon their arrest. Soon after, she advocated for a police matron to be hired to tend to the women who ended up in jail. She was active in every aspect of the shelter, from its inception to the day the doors closed, the administration of affairs, all the financial aspects, finding and assisting the women and girls who were there, and maintained contact with many throughout their lives. She attended many of their marriages, and she was godmother to their children. Close to 1,000 women and girls, and an assortment of others, including infants and some indigenous men, called the shelter home. According to an 1879 annual report, no homeless woman has ever been refused a night lodging or a meal, even at great inconvenience or overcrowding, a fact that Arria was proud of. Florence Kenyon, another person, I hope there are no relatives here, was one of the many girls that Arria did not give up on. Miss Kenyon had a lengthy criminal record, included being arrested for stealing a turkey on January 6, 1875. This was a notorious event and was the first criminal action reported by the newspaper for a review of arrest. In 1877, 2 years later, she arrived at the shelter where she continued her troubling ways. According to a newspaper article, she was angry about some unknown circumstance at the shelter and threatened to fire the building, a common threat, unfortunately. The shelter matron took her seriously and called the police. Florence Kenyon was arrested, pleaded guilty, and was sent below to the city jail, waiting for her transport to the penitentiary. 1 week later, the article stated, the would-be firebug demonstrated a contrite spirit and was allowed to return to the shelter for another try. It was not beneath Arria to go out and locate girls herself, particularly during the early years. In a letter written by her mother to George, she recalled one such rescue. Mama wrote, "Yesterday you would have been amused if you could have seen Arria walking through the city with a tall policeman by her side. Perhaps you would be somewhat surprised. She was in search of a girl of 15 who left her home for some months and who had every reason to think she was with bad associates going to ruin. Arria went to the police office, described the girl, and told them where she felt she was. So they detained a police officer to go with her and take the girl away. After a long walk, they arrived at a wretched house where the policeman entered and found the girl herself alone in the house. She made no objection to accompanying them, except she was left in charge of the house. But the officer told her she had nothing to do but to submit to orders. And with that, Arria took the girl and lodged her safely in the shelter, where she seemed very thankful to be. And we shall find her a place in the country, as she is not willing to return to her home, which is a miserable one, and where she says she was so unhappy that she would rather die than go back. The house has been of good use, though, of course, we do not expect to keep on sure half who come to us. We shall have the satisfaction of something better to offer them. All efforts were made to replicate family life for the girls, where they would receive moral instruction, religious instruction, prayer, and observance of Mass. Arria believed that individuals must benefit themselves for the benefit of society. The girls engaged in academic studies and had many opportunities to develop employable skills, sewing, washing, and cooking, in order to prevent each for an independent life. If they did not have families to return to or were to marry, they trained as servants and nursemaids, and when appropriate, were placed in homes that would utilize their services. Arria relied on her family members. She relied on George and Lily, her brother and sister-in-law, Malden, Mass, and they would send, like one was Hattie Turner, they sent to George when Lily had her first child for her to help take care of. Arria relied on family members, friends, and parishioners in locating appropriate situations for the girls to move on to. The shelter closed in 1918 because of newer ways of doing things. Arria believed that preventative work was far better than rescue. For 2 years, Rome State School rented the building. Then the furnishings went to the Onondaga Nation Mission, and the property sold to the Most Holy Rosary Church. The proceeds were to establish both the Huntington Foundation and the Huntington Club in her honor, which, among other things, housed single employed women and provided recreational activities. Eventually, both formed the Huntington Family Center. While this ended what in social work we refer to as direct practice, it did not stop her commitment to the city and beyond. In 1816, she and James founded and became members of the board of directors of the Bureau of Labor and Charities. This was an effort driven by the business sector of society. They needed workers, and they wanted to identify who the poor was and hopefully get them back into as active workers so they could support the businesses. And the Bureau of Labor and Charities was all across New York State. This organization coordinated private and public relief efforts and is considered a foundational social welfare organization. It's the roots of the United Way came out of the Bureau of Labor and Charities. She served as the vice president for 7 years. Her work was not restricted to Central New York. In 1895, she was appointed by Governor Black to the Board of Managers of the New York State Reformatory for Women. Arria and 4 other managers oversaw the construction of Bedford State Penitentiary. She advocated for a very humane reformatory where children would stay with their mothers. There would be schools on the ground, and the women have dorm rooms, etc. This vision came to a screeching halt when Governor Theodore Roosevelt was elected and appointed Josephine Shaw Lowell, whose vision was the opposite of hers. Apparently, there's a building named for Arria on the prison grounds in recognition of her contributions. At some time, she served as the board of trustees for the Burnham Farm, a school of industry for boys in Columbia County. Over time, Arria became recognized and widely respected as an advocate for children, education, women's suffrage, and labor. Nonetheless, Arria's concern for the poor never wavered. In an 1892 address to the Bureau of Labor and Charities, she argued that both orphans and abandoned children were far better off with Christian families than orphanages. Her notion of boarding out was well received. All agreed that our children's lack of industry can best be provided through family life. Concerned with the increasing infant and child mortality rates throughout Syracuse, Arria and her network of women focused on the health of women and children. As a project of the In So Much Circle of the King's Daughters, her prayer circle, they created the Visiting Nurse Association, 1890. This organization assisted pregnant and parenting women to not only prevent infant death, but to teach and support families. Together with their other prayer circles of the King's Daughters, the women created the maternity ward at the House of the Good Shepherd and established the Memorial Hospital for Women and Girls, where I was born. Ms. Huntington was a member of the Committee of 13, organized for the purpose of studying prostitution in the city of Syracuse. The Committee of 13 was concerned with the rapidly escalating cases of sexually transmitted diseases and the desire to inform the citizens of Syracuse the actual conditions relative to vice and prostitution. The committee set out to interview prostitutes, madams, johns, and barkeeps. Arria was specifically interested in the stories of the women who frequently reported that they had been used or ruined by a man, a father, a relative, a neighbor, a stranger, and fled to the city in hope of gaining employment and a place to live. Without money or skills, the only option was to enter prostitution. Women's suffrage was the principal concern throughout her lifetime. She was a founding member of the Syracuse Political Equality Club in 1892 and held a variety of positions, including vice president, the 8th and 14th ward president, and chair of the philanthropic committee. The object of the club was to secure women the unrestricted exercise of all rights of citizenship and equal constitutional rights with men and equal protection under the law. They worked tirelessly educating women about the vote, the present condition of municipal affairs, and the responsibilities of citizenships. The group sponsored such guest speakers as Susan B. Anthony, Catherine Spence of Australia, Reverend Denise Eastman, Mrs. George Cluster, and Julia Ward Howell. It was here that Arria honed her belief that philanthropic work was a political act. It provided women the preparation for the responsibilities of the future. Charity work provided women with the necessary skills to participate in full citizenship. She was frequently called upon to address not only the club, but to speak at the New York State's women's suffrage conferences, as well as a variety of clubs and organizations that championed this cause. On November 17th in 1892, she was on a panel at the Whiting Opera House to debate the merits of women's suffrage movement. The panel consisted of 4 men and 2 women, Arria and Miss Mary Eastman. Arria said, "Ever since men began to think at all, they tried to think how to build a new commonwealth founded on justice. How are we helping them to lay these foundations? In a state founded on justice, there can be no law against justice to women. They say the suffrage movement threatens the sanctity of the home, but do men do nothing to injure the sanctity of the home? There are 3 classes: the home, the church, and society. Yet still there is a class of women who exist yet have no homes, although they have food and shelter. Are not we, being stronger than these, the ones to provide for the morally weak ones? How do the other sex guard and protect the worker class? What safeguards do they raise for them? If we cannot leave these women to the other sex to care for and protect, how are we to guard her unless we have the power to make laws for her protection? Who but a woman can understand these weaker women or understand how to arouse the spark of self-respect in them? Preventative work is better than rescue work. How can women help on the work in the plan of saving her weaker sister when she is obstructed on every side? That class is not represented here today. Why? Is it because other women are not willing to sit beside her? She went on and was very concerned because later on in the week, the state was going to enact legislation for the regulation of vice and the age of consent. And her concern was, do you think our lawmakers will vote for this bill if they knew that their wives and daughters were opposed to it? So, Arria was unapologetic for her position in the support of poor and dispossessed. Women must have full citizenship. And the interesting thing is, she called her friends, her network of friends, the people who were helping her do that, to task. Like, why aren't those women sitting beside us today? We need their voice. Tied to the issue of suffrage was organized labor, a cause taken up too by both her father and brother James. By the 1890s, many mills and factories, specifically the garment industry on the north side of Syracuse, employed many women and children. She spoke out against child labor and was an ardent supporter of better pay, shorter hours, and improved condition in the shops, and was appalled by the sweating system. Miss Huntington was a member of the Industrial Committee of the New York State Women's Suffrage Association and had represented the organization at the convention of the New York State branch of the American Federation of Labor in Albany in 1898, and used her position as opportunities to speak out against the horrible conditions. In addition, she was the co-founder and member of the Syracuse Working Girls Club and its representatives to the Consumer League of Syracuse, together with her brother James, who at that point had become a monk and was living in an apartment in New York City in Hell's Kitchen, doing work in their neighborhood. They co-founded the Consumer Protection League in New York City, and then when they came back to Syracuse, she opened up the Consumer League of Syracuse. In 1898, Arria focused on the adoption of the union label. In an address about the importance of the union label, Ms. Huntington stated, "How can we trace back the history of the article we buy? Hence, the best proof is the union label, which is a full guarantee to the purchaser that the producer was sufficiently paid and justly treated." A union label was an initiative of the National Consumer League agenda. Arria would continue to make the Syracuse community aware of its implications, to not only to the consumers, but its workers. What is considered the pinnacle of her career occurred in 1897 at 49 years of age, when she was appointed by the Republican mayor for school commissioner to the City of Syracuse Department of Education. Although this action, as well as her unopposed bid for a second term, initially brought up fears of a potential constitutional crisis, upon the announcement by the mayor, an editorial appeared in the Syracuse Journal that questioned the ability of women to hold public office. Women didn't have the right to vote. Why would they have the right to hold a public office? The issue went nowhere. However, it came to the forefront again when Arria declined a third term, and the potential concern for a woman to replace her rose. It was a widely held belief that no woman, or no man for that matter, was more highly qualified to hold this position but her. And it was a widespread belief throughout Syracuse that the city's children were the true winner. Arria was on the side of teachers advocating for the unionization of teachers, pay raises, and requiring continuing education. Arguing that the mind of the teacher should grow as well as the child, she initiated a special committee to oversee teacher training. With her firm belief in independence, she had a specific interest in vocational and manual training for boys and girls, and was a supporter of the Sloyd method of instruction. The champion of the Sloyd method of instruction actually came from one of Arria's teachers when she was at the Agassiz School in Cambridge. Elizabeth Agassiz shepherded the Sloyd method of institution in the Boston City Schools and was recognized for that. She believed all students must be proficient in a skill, and it was the responsibility of the skills to provide opportunities to do so. When there wasn't available funding, which was usually the case, she engaged her networks of friends in raising money for the purchases of and soliciting donations of equipment, sewing machines, saws, hammers, and materials for instruction. She also focused on primary education, arguing for a specific superintendent position to oversee it. She was also on the Buildings and Hygiene Committee, and she was very concerned with the health of children. And a very close friend of hers, Dr. Julia Hatchett, who was to become their family physician, became one of the city's doctors to overlook the health of the children. It would be decades before a woman would be elected to the Syracuse Board of Education. Arria Sergeant Huntington died at the age of 72 years following his stay at the Pines, a private sanitarium in Auburn. Newspaper articles stated that she was on the mend and ready to return to her good works when she was suddenly struck ill, operated on, developed pneumonia, and died. Although she probably did have an emergency surgery, she was never truly on the mend. Family lore states that she had senility, which is the explanation for why her stay at the Pines. It was customary for women of a certain age and a certain time to write their biography. With all her accomplishments, including a biography of her father and an unpublished biography of her mother, one would have expected Arria to write about her life, but she didn't, and I'm not surprised. Her work spoke for itself. Instead, she wrote a poetic account of the natural beauty of the area surrounding her beloved ancestral home, 40 acres, located in Hadley, Massachusetts, the Elm Valley, where she included details of her family. Every year since her birth, Arria and the family spent every summer, beginning at the end of June, and they were returned to Syracuse or Boston at the end of September. She and her family summered there since her birth, as I just said, every June into the end of September. The book is called Under a Colonial Roof Tree, Fireside Chronicles of Early New England, 1891. Here's a passage that summarizes her and her family. None of those who lived there desired greatly the world's riches or the world's applause. They were content to serve their neighbors and the community with the same spirit in which their forefathers founded the new country. They had bequeathed to those who came after the best birthright, an example of loyalty and virtue, which is in the power of each to imitate. Thank you. Please ask questions. Or not.
Hi. Thank you so much, Kathy. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Can you hear?
I haven't been able to figure out where St. John's Mission was. But I think Calvary became Calvary Church. I think it's on James Street. Yeah. Yeah.
I guess I'm always interested in social change and so on. Were similar things happening in England? What influenced her besides her father and so on, and some of her, who were the key mentors and so on?
You know, I draw. She never wrote. She knew what was going on in England and everything. She also knew a lot of people, like especially in social work. She knew Jane Addams. She knew Florence Kenyon. You know, what we call the four mothers of social work. I believe it was the way she was raised. The Porter Phelps Huntington house, it's now a museum. 3 generations of the Huntington family lived there. Mrs. Porter, husband, died very young. And Mrs. Porter had to take over the 40 acres of farmland to support her family. And she worked really, really hard to do that. Then the next generation, the bishop's parents, the Phelps, the Phelps, the mother, Phelps. Her husband, who was a Unitarian, died young too, and then Mrs. Phelps was stuck with it, of taking care of the farm. So they were very fierce, independent women, very strong, independent women. And I just believe it was just how they were raised. It was their beliefs. There was nothing in the way to say not to do anything. But she was very devout religiously, and she really felt that here she had a place, and that she would care for others, like her brothers and her sisters eventually.
Did any of her siblings marry?
Ruth was the only one who married. Ruth married Archibald Sessions. Ruth was high-spirited and mischievous since the day she was born. Ruth had a really hard time with Arria because Arria was the third parent. And she would often write to James about how angry she was because Arria kept messing things up for her. Ruth was a musician, and even Arria had to chaperone her to Germany one year. So she would go to a school, and then Ruth, on her way back, Arria had to go get her, which she wasn't too fond of. And she counted on James to support her because James used to get mad too at Arria, because whenever the parents had to go, whether they're in Boston or Syracuse, it was up to, well, in Syracuse, it was only Arria to watch out for the babies. But in Boston, it was both George and Arria to watch out for them. But yeah.
And in terms of the male Huntingtons, are there any descendants named Huntington in Syracuse still?
With a Huntington name, no. The Andrews, Charles and Bill and Virginia Andrews. Bill was a descendant of that. It was Bill's mother, Mrs. Charles Andrews, who, okay, we'll go back to the story. I read this article very early on about when I found Arria, or Arria found me, which said that they had found Arria's diary in a bookstore. And they returned the diary to the Huntington Center. So I went to the Huntington Center, and there was no diary. And for years, I was like, what? This diary just ate at me. And you could call me odd. Lots of people do. I had a dream one night, and it was that she handed me the diary. And there was this, it was bounded in yellow, like a yellow book. Gave it to me. And I woke up saying, I knew there was a diary. And I did find a diary. This is right at the start of email. I emailed the archive in Amherst. I said, by any chance, do you have Arria Huntington's diary? And yes, we do. And what had happened was Mrs. Charles Andrew got the diary from the Huntington Club and typed it out. The diary was when she was 13 years old, and it was called And So. She had a title, And So. And in my email, I said, is it bounded at all? They said, it's in a manila folder. And so I'm like, well, that's yellow enough. So that was it. So, yeah.
Any other questions?
Over here? Oh, there were probably hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds. You know, she had a very, she counted on a lot of her friends from Boston. You know, Mary Putnam, her best friend, when she was 13 years old. Probably, you know, one of the things about a diary, a New England diary at that time, they're pretty dull, you know. It rained today. I slept. But when it came to Mary Putnam, it got excited. Mary Putnam says, on Tuesday, my hair should curl. I was elated in the archive for them, you know. I have a fondness for curls, and I'm like, oh, go Mary Putnam. I can't imagine why her hair would curl. So it was people like her. Edith Rotek was ended up in New York City. And it's actually, I want to find more about who this network of friends were. And little by little, I am finding out these friends. Like Edith Rotek. This is something else about 19th century newspapers. There's no such thing as privacy. When Edith died, or when people died, if you were prominent, the will was in the paper. And so when Edith died, she left $10,000 to the shelter and $5,000 to Arria. You know, and then you would find this throughout. People would die, and they would write Arria into their will, or her friends, so she could continue her good works. You know, but there was this, I would say hundreds, I would never say thousands, but she was known and she knew a lot of people. Yeah. Her father, when it comes to labor, that's really, really interesting. Her father was a member of the Knights of Labor, and James, they say, it's interesting that, and people just, it's amazing, like people who know anything about the Huntington, they'll say something, but sometimes it's only a grain of truth is in there, but it puts me in the right direction. Because people are always saying, James is a socialist, James is a socialist. And he wasn't a Marxist socialist, and he wasn't a social Christian like we think of like in Europe. He was described as a social Christian. And his beliefs, 3 major beliefs, well, there were 4. 3 of them, or 4. One was free pews. He wanted free pews. And there was something in the missions. They had to have free, you know, pews. And they were angry about St. Paul's. They only had a few free pews, you know. So that was early on. Had to have that. Labor should organize. And he would go when there were strikes. I think one was in Missouri, a coal strike. He went to it to help negotiate that. Free trade, and he was a single taxer. He believed in a single tax, and he was very involved in a New York City mayor election one year. The candidate that he supported was a single taxer. So, you know, so it's interesting when people say he was a socialist. It's like, what do you mean by that? You know, but he really, really, really was fierce in that labor has a right to organize, and that labor had a right, you had a right to get paid, you know, and free pews, you know, very important to him.
I'm interested in the connection that there may be between the current Huntington Family Center in Syracuse and the Huntington family. Is there a direct relationship?
Oh yeah, there was a direct relationship.
Could you talk to me?
Yeah, well, before the Huntington Club, because Arria was very interested in what happened to single women when they came to Syracuse. Look, women had one of 2 places to be. You stayed in your father's home, or you married and moved into your husband's home, or there was something wrong with you, and you would go to some institution for feeble-minded women. Yeah, and Arria, especially with her work when she was interviewing prostitutes, was that women need a place to be and gainfully employed. Huntington Club was one such place where, yeah, there were rooms that women who came to Syracuse stayed at the Huntington Club. There was a woman there to make sure they weren't doing bad things or that men were getting at them. So the Huntington Club. And the Huntington Club actually did a lot of stuff with Dunbar, where it became the Dunbar Center, the Dunbar Club. And then together with the Huntington Foundation, with the money left over from things, they did come together to form Huntington Family Center. And so that was, again, an offshoot of what it would come. But before Huntington Club, she had, which I'm trying to find more stuff about, the Girls Patriot League, which all I guess is probably like 13, 14-year-old girls to get them engaged in citizenship. But that somehow also pushed it to the Huntington Club where women stayed. No, there is no official biography of her, but I hope to write it. It gets in the way. See, I'm still, there's still much to be found. I know stuff is out there. The interesting thing about working with archives, especially when they're large archives, and they have maybe 2 employees, they don't know what they have. And so I have to, there's a time and a place when I could approach them, when they could find what I needed. For example, Harvard. My trails took me to Harvard University archives, which has anyone ever been in Harvard University archives? This was before the pandemic and everything, but it was after 9/11. I had to go through 2 security checkpoints to get into the room, the sitting room for the archives. And I was just so happy that I had an appointment because I don't know what would have happened if I didn't have an appointment. So I was in conversation with Harvard, and I told them that they have the Houghton Mifflin archive, the book publisher archive. So I contacted them and said that Arria had 2 books published by Houghton Mifflin, and other family had books published. And I wanted to see the contracts. So the first email back was, well, we'll look, but we don't know anything of that. But then they found the contracts, and they found other communications for that. So things have taken, time to get to it. Now, being from Salve, Arria had lots of connections to Salve and the titans of Salve process. She was friends with the Hazards. Roland Hazard was the first president of Salve process. And the Hazard girls adored Arria, and they ran around together. In fact, imagine this. They would walk from Salve to Skinny Alice for fun. They loved the outdoors. And I'm like, you go down Route 5, and how do you know to turn? But that was things they did. And different Hazards wrote their recollections of Arria. And that's in an archive in Rhode Island, because the Hazards are from Peacedale, Rhode Island, right? And so there's stuff, there is stuff there. I did find some, actually the Salve Public Library had a recollection from one of the Hazards, wrote the event of her death, but if I go to Peacedale, where they're from, to look in that archive, yeah. Yep.
Future social workers, how do you use, what role does Arria play in teaching and working with these future social workers?
Well, the interesting thing is, it depends on my mood. But no, when we talk about the history of social work, we talk about the social settlement movement, which like I said, Arria knew Jane Addams, who's credited for Hull House. And James, in his way, had his settlement. He called his work was settlement work, what Jane Addams was doing. He had lived in Hell's Kitchen among the people that he wanted to serve with. So what it does is to bring to them, to make it more relatable, and for them to understand that it wasn't just Hull House in Chicago and all throughout New York City, look at all other cities. Like, I'm right outside of Hartford, Connecticut. I say, look at Hartford, Connecticut. There were settlement houses. And the other is the Charity Organization Society, which is not spoke about as much in social work, except that it was out of the Charity Organization Society where casework came, and the importance of research methods, of having to go, you documented the poor. You want to document the reasons for the poor. So that's how it informed education. So again, and because I have documents, I could show the students what that is. So when it comes to the history piece, that works, but it does depend upon my mood. If I want to get to Arria.
Thank you for a wonderful presentation. I'd like to know if Arria or James or both had any connection to Dorothy Day and her work in New York City.
I would imagine that they knew of her, but I would guess James probably knew her. The interesting with James is, well, let me say, he was ordained Episcopalian. He actually was involved with Grace Church. He actually had a lot to do with that. But he, I don't want to say he was troubled. He wanted something more, which led him to New York City. And then when he finally told his family that he was going to start a monastic order, become a monk, you could only imagine what happened to the family. And Hannah feared she was going to become Catholic. Like, what are you doing? And what do you mean you're starting your own monastery? Aren't the ones in Europe good enough? Just lots of stuff. And he wanted an American monastery. My guess is in New York City, when he first started out, because he mentioned lots of names, like Jane Addams. They were members of the Ethical Society, and they would have big conferences. And so James and Arria was asked to read Jane Addams' writing, where she introduced the social settlement and a couple papers that she was presenting. Then again, they depend on patrons. Someone offered land to James Otis offered land to him, so he went and started the monastery, had a building in Westminster, Maryland. And so he moved there, where he really felt out of place there. And then patrons offered West York on the Hudson, where the monastery is now, Holy Cross is. And so he was able to come back to New York. And what you found with James is he was still a thinker. He wasn't involved in the front lines of providing services. He became more of a thinker and more engaged with his monastic life. But the more I dig, it's amazing the people that they knew, the network of people. Can I just say something funny? Okay. So in Connecticut, I know a lot of nuns. And this one nun, Sister Fish, she recalled to everybody what it was like when Dorothy Day came to her 9th grade class. And here they were meeting Dorothy Day, Well, the next day, just everyone came. It was a girls' school. Everybody came wearing what looked like potato sacks to be Dorothy Day. They wanted the uniform and they wanted to be Dorothy Day, but I could stop laughing. I was like, Sister Fish did, no, I didn't. I didn't have a potato sack, but I would have worn one too, because they just couldn't believe Dorothy Day came to talk to their class.
Thank you very much, Kathy. One last thing. We understand that this is a very special day for you.
Oh, Eve.
So we have something for you,
Oh, thank you.
Kathy, or Baratta, I should say. And I think, Nolan, you're going to head it.
Wait a minute. Oh, no, just a minute. First, this is a thank you from all of us here at St. Paul's.
Oh, thank you.
You were our first speaker in our 200th or bicentennial celebration.
Wow,
and
thanks.
A little tribute of St. Paul's. Also, as I say, no, it's tomorrow is Baratta's birthday. Tomorrow is Baratta's birthday.
65. I'm waiting for that Medicare card.
Well,
ARP had hit me up when I turned 50. I mean, you think that.
and as, of course, a native of Solvay, and I'm going to share a story she shared with me years ago of her brother who was serving as assistant superintendent some school district outside of Boston. His son was a junior in high school at Syracuse University, came to the high school. And the visitor, the SU person said, so outside of basketball, what do you know about Syracuse? And her nephew replied,
Harrison Bakery has great half moon cookies, and you got to go to Columbus Bakery and get the flat loaf. The flat loaf.
the guy looked at us, my dad's from Solvay.
Yeah.
But so with that, I want to present a half dozen
Oh.
6 half moon cookies.
Oh, great.
Connor would like one, though. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this. That's for me.
Thank you. It was
And
fun.
it is Nolan.
Yes. As your choir member, I was going to lead you in a happy birthday here to
Oh, my God.
Catherine. So, choir members, you can sing in parts if you'd like. The rest of us can sing in unison, all right? Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Catherine Baratta. Happy birthday to you. And while I have the mic, you never should give it to a retired minister. If you're able to help clean up afterwards and bring tables and chairs back to the closet, we'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you again, Kathy.